I guess I should feel worse about it than I do, but when it comes right down to it, I feel like it's important to be able to pay the rent. So yeah, I don't really feel like there's like that much material difference. I don't know that it's so much more pure to have done something for like the editorial side of a magazine and then eschew the corporate side because you're too good for it. I think I'd rather be a sellout than a hypocrite.
Yeah, I assume you're not doing like ads for like, clubbing baby seals or fracking or anything.
I mean, those are not as lucrative as you'd think, so no.
I would assume that there's a lot of money in the fracking industry, at least. Right. I know they're like actively seeking cartoonists, but they've got a lot of money to kick around.
Yeah, it's true. But the baby seals is just where, it's the bottom's really dropped out of that market.
That's fair. People aren't buying as many pelts these days as they used to. That's interesting though. So you feel like you've shifted to longer form stuff. What does that mean exactly?
So longer form stuff, yes, I've been pitching like longer pieces to the New Yorker and other places. And even the weekly gag stuff is also pitched. You send in a batch every week and they kind of buy one or they don't. I've had more off weeks this year than in previous years. I feel like everybody is experiencing some kind of like productivity loss in one way or another. In terms of pitching stuff, yeah, that's been like less. There's just less time in a day. But longer stuff like books, etc. I feel like usually my year goes with like, the usual stuff like gag cartoons and a couple longer things here and there, and writing that. Most of the writing I do, I also pitch. So most of it comes from that. And then I'll have like one big project I'm working on. Again, is usually a matter of like having successfully pitched something. So like last year it was the Hugs book, which weirdly enough I didn't pitch. They pitched me. So
you keep describing it as weird that like anybody would want to hire you for something or pitch a book to you or have you do an ad. That even at this point in your career, you're consistently shocked that people are interested in your work.
You spend long enough on that wall and you start to think of yourself as a flower.
At a certain point though, it must be clear that like you're because you're still doing it and,
right.
and obviously it just being published in the New Yorker is a success in and of itself. It must feel like you're on some kind of a right path.
Yeah, I'm not. I am a cockroach of a woman. I am still here. Look at my New England upbringing, being like, don't compliment yourself. Stop it.
Does pitching to the New Yorker still feel like a crapshoot at this point, even though you've been doing it for a while? Does it still like surprise you what does and doesn't make it in?
Less than it used to, I guess. Sometimes there are ones where I feel like are kind of a shoo-in that don't go, and that's always like, oh, okay. But then sometimes I'll sell one where I'm surprised that they took it. But I am less often wrong now when I have one that I'm like, oh, this is definitely gonna go. So it doesn't feel as, I'm more than 10 years in on it now, so it doesn't feel as daunting as it used to. But I don't know if anybody ever gets to the point where they just assume they're gonna sell every week. Hardly anybody sells like every week. So there's always like an opportunity to hate yourself.
I feel like there's like a certain amount of mystique very specifically around the New Yorker pitching process. When you've been doing it for long enough, are they candid or upfront about why they aren't picking something? Do they suggest that you punch it up? Do they give you editorial advice? Do they want you to like repitch stuff, or once it's kind of out of the way, it's basically dead to them?
No, you can repitch stuff. I repitch stuff all the time. Yeah, I would say it's not like it gets more transparent based on how long you've been pitching. In fact, I think in some ways, the editors are more likely to give you feedback if you haven't been pitching for that long. So with Bob, it really depended on Bob Mankoff was the previous cartoon editor at the New Yorker. And with him, it really just depended on what mood he was in. Sometimes he was feeling chatty, sometimes he wasn't. And with Emma, who has been the editor for a couple 2-3 years now, I think she is very conscientious about like, here is what works, here doesn't. With me personally, she knows what I'm up to enough that like, there's not like a whole lot of back and forth. If she has a specific note for something I've sold, then she'll tell me. But I also, obviously there's not a whole lot of in-person pitching happening at all. But even previous to the COVID situation, I very rarely went in because I'm very lazy. And if I don't have to put on pants, I'm not gonna put on pants. So that's what PDFs are for.
You don't think the process was useful at all to actually like go there in person and to get
Oh,
out
it's
of the apartment?
100% useful. If you are new to the magazine or you haven't sold before, it is very, very useful to go in person and and let them get a sense of you as a person, first of all, because I think there is a lot to be said for meeting somebody face to face, and to hear feedback. Absolutely. So I was going in face to face for a long time before I sold, and then even after I sold, to establish the relationship. Absolutely. And then, you know, as they get to know your stuff more and get to know what to expect from you, it's less of a, let's see how we can make this better. It's like, if you don't sell for a while, maybe you'll start to try to mix it up, or you'll outright ask, like, is there something else I should be doing? But it's not as crucial once you've really established a relationship, I think, to get that like face to face or constant feedback.
Do you find, like, now that you're not like actually like in some ways physically able to go in, that you kind of miss the process? Like I find like there's the stuff that I'm missing at this point in my life is stuff that I never really expected to miss.
Like commutes.
The grass is always greener, but yeah, just like really just stupid. Just going to the office, just stupid stuff. I'm somebody who would like go into the office, you know, 5 days a week, and now I'm like stuck in my apartment. And the commute, like being on the train in the morning, you know, reading a book on the train is something that I absolutely miss. Yeah, no,
I mean, I haven't had to commute. I've worked from home for the past decade plus, but I enjoy the subway. Like, I like being on the train, and I do miss that. I don't know that I necessarily miss the opportunity to go in for the meeting, mainly because once they moved to the World Trade Center, it really changed the vibe of it. Like, people didn't go out to lunch really that much anymore. The One World Trade Center has a very, it really hasn't settled into its energy yet, I guess is the kindest thing to say about that building.
You mean because it's a mass grave? Is that?
Yeah, there's that. So yeah, it never felt as convivial, I guess. Plus, like, the offices, the new offices are open plan, so it felt like they would sometimes like put a conference room aside for the cartoonists to like sit and hang out in and wait their turn. But like, it always just felt more like I was imposing when I would go there than it did when they were in Times Square.
You seem like a pretty social person, and obviously you've got this, you know, you've got a performative act for your comics, and that you're like going to these events and standing up in front of people, which isn't necessarily, that's not a characteristic that you see with a lot of cartoonists.
So that kind of all came about years and years and years ago, before I moved to New York. In 2003, John Hodgman asked me to be in a series that he was doing at the time called Little Gray Books. And I lived in Chicago at the time, and I had no idea about anything. I was like, sure, I'll come to New York and do this show. Like, here's a funny cartoon I made. Maybe I could just show a slideshow.
Oh, you actually flew out specifically to do the first one?
Not just for that, but I also would take any opportunity I could at that point to go to New York and show stuff around. Like, I kind of had it in my mind that I was ready to leave Chicago. I just didn't quite have the balls to move to New York yet. So this was really the thing that like kind of pushed me over the edge into thinking like, okay, maybe this is a thing. Maybe I could live here. So I came out and did that show, and spent the rest of the weekend just like showing my portfolio around and like, you know, meeting people, et cetera, et cetera. But that was sort of the genesis of this feeling of like, I can do something on stage that is connected to what I do, cartooning wise. And it really, like, that kind of cracked open this possibility for me that like I have really loved ever since.
Chicago seems like a pretty good cartooning town. You know, obviously there's a lot of great cartoonists out there. You know, there's a lot of good stores. There seems like a good scene. Did it not feel like a good fit professionally?
it is a fantastic cartoonist town. Like, and yeah, it's not even so much that it didn't feel like a good fit professionally. I am not such a talent that people were gonna like beat down the door to find me. Like, especially in 2003, 2004, it was very important for my career growth to come out to like the seat of where things were happening and beat down those doors myself. So that made a huge difference in my career. And at the time, I was more focused on being like just an illustrator. I mean, I had the comic strip, I had Lulu 8-Ball, but I thought of myself more as an aspiring illustrator. And it took me a really long time to come to the realization that like I am basically a writer who draws more than anything else. So that's sort of been like the that's settling. Oh, sorry, I squeaked the chair. That's been sort of like the arc of my professional life since moving here 16 years ago, was this sort of like reorienting of what it is that I wanted to do based on like what I could do.
So at that point, it was important to be in New York in person to actually like go to the offices to pitch your things. That's not something that you could have done, online.
Not really, like, I mean, it was like, obviously there was an internet, you could email people, but it still made a difference, I think, just to be able to do that kind of thing in person. And also just to sort of like be in the mix and go out places and meet people who would pass along a name to you or recommend you for, for this, that, and the other thing. You could send your website, you could send your portfolio, but like, social media wasn't really a thing. So you couldn't sort of like build a brand for yourself in the way that you can now. And also for me personally, and this is nothing against Chicago, I liked Chicago, but I never fell in love with Chicago. And that's on me. That's not on Chicago. There's no really real great reason not to. It's just, I grew up on the East Coast. I never intended to die in the Midwest.
Moving from the third largest city to the first largest city doesn't feel like that large of a jump.
New York was and is a lot more expensive than Chicago.
Mm-hmm. So it was really just like a pragmatic problem of, can I pay my rent doing what I'm doing?
Yeah, it was pragmatic. And also New York is like tangled and ungovernable in a way that Chicago is not. Chicago is a staid and workman-like place in ways that I really appreciate in theory, but in practice, it just like, it never captured my heart, if that makes sense. And I had moved to Chicago from Baltimore, which where I went to school, and I loved Baltimore with all my heart. It might just, part of it might just be like I couldn't love Chicago because I never fell out of love with Baltimore enough. But yeah, Chicago really on paper is the perfect city. I don't know why I couldn't have my heart there.
It's interesting. I say this as somebody who has like been to both places, but not spent longer than a week in either one. But they both feel like working class cities in similar ways. Mm-hmm. Chicago and Baltimore.
They're pretty different. Baltimore, I feel like, is just kind of has like a slightly unhinged quality to it. It's got more of an anarchic vibe than I really sensed in Chicago. One thing that I think was very important for me in like my early 20s, like something that laid a base I didn't even know I was laying, was that people just did the work and didn't make a big fuss about it in Chicago. And I think that was a really important lesson to absorb, even if I wasn't really conscious of absorbing it. Baltimore in the 90s was a very easy place to exist with your thumb up your ass the whole time. Like I sometimes, wonder like what would my life have been if I had stayed in Baltimore? And I don't know, I probably would have drunk myself to death by now. And Chicago demanded more of you than Baltimore did in terms of ambition. But Chicago was also a place where like ambition was kind of seen as suspect. Like, and to this day, I tell myself that I'm not a particularly ambitious person, but I like that can't possibly be true.
No, because even like Chicago is an ambitious place, perhaps, but you moved to the most ambitious place in the U.S.
Yeah.
in terms of cutthroat, hierarchies and people like slitting each other's throats to get work. It doesn't get much harder than New York.
I moved here to light a fire under my ass, and it did. So I at least was, self-aware enough to know that I needed that fire lit under my ass. So yeah. And I will say that it was a lot less cutthroat than I thought it was going to be. I found that by and large, people were, I wouldn't say, eager to help per se, but people were like, people got it. They're like, oh, you're here trying to do a thing. We are all here trying to do a thing. Let's try to help each other out as much as possible. So yeah, I mean, it might be different if I had moved here to get into like show business or something like that. But no, I feel like I got pretty lucky.
I got the feeling reading your last long piece from the New Yorker that you've been experiencing over the past few years something that I have been experiencing in New York, for probably going on a decade now, of just like the trickle of all of your friends leaving the city for some reason. And maybe this is maybe it's because I'm from California originally, but like, I probably lost about half of my friends to Los Angeles over the last 10 years. It obviously predates COVID. Is your sense of just, is it New York changing? Is it just kind of getting older and having lived here for long enough that people, are leaving?
I think it's a factor of so many things. I mean, I lost a big wave because I have a daughter who's 8. I lost a big wave of like mom friends when all of our kids were toddlers, because a lot of people kind of like, tapped out early and moved to the suburbs, which was not a thing that was ever in the cards for me. I absolutely have never wanted to live in a suburb. Like, but when I visit, I'm reminded of the fact that being in a suburb makes me tired and angry. So
specifically when I like go home, I definitely revert to 13-year-old me. And I try to fight it, but I can't.
Yeah. It's and also like the suburbs of New York are also not cheap, not to keep coming back to practical things, but it's not like we'd be like saving a lot of money if we moved to New Jersey. So yeah. And you like you, I have a lot of friends who have moved to LA. Like COVID definitely changed the landscape in a lot of ways. People like moved upstate or moved to be closer to their parents. Yeah, it's been, but I wouldn't say I've felt like I look around and oh my God, everybody's gone. I feel like there's still like a lot of people who are kind of hanging out. But if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have said, well, like money has just decimated this city and made it unlivable. And now it's like, that's that's in this very awkward stage of still being true while also being decimated by like a virus and no money. So I don't know how that's going to shake out in the long run.
There's always, for as long as I've been here, there's always been kind of a romanticization of kind of the, the gritty, shitty New York. I see some like short-term changes happening. Obviously, there are a number of smaller businesses that can't sustain, but it does seem like it's just going to kind of accelerate everything. It's gonna, it's just going to accelerate everything in the very strategic direction that things are moving in.
Yeah, I mean, so many things were kind of untenable and unsustainable to begin with, and yeah, no, I think you're right. I think this. I don't know what it's going to do to colleges, but I can't imagine it'll do anything good. Businesses that have shuttered during this time, I mean, so many of them aren't going to come back. Like, I don't know that it will bring things to a point where the things that were making it unsustainable, like high business rent and, high regular rent will drop to a point where people can rebuild. I don't know. It's gonna be a weird couple of years.
How is an 8-year-old adapting to this weird new world that we're living in?
So it was tougher in the beginning because like it was this very abrupt shift from school to online, that was really rough. She went from liking school to it being a real shit show. It's easier now because, you know, we're not like, you know, we're not being profligate. We're not like going out to bars or anything like that. But, you know, we go to the playground and, you know, she can go outside and see some friends and that kind of thing. So we're not as isolated as we were in the early part of the pandemic. Some things she's just kind of like getting used to. All the kids are kind of like, they're not losing it, but they're all a little screwed up right now.
That's kind of all of us to some degree, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, and also kids pick up that their parents are worried and that like things are, you know, things feel weird, feel tenuous, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I think, but you know, kids are also adaptable. And if World War II movies have taught me anything, it's like they can often find ways to have fun even in a bomb site. So
God, what was that Roberto Benigni movie where
oh God, yeah,
like the concentration camp?
Yeah.
I think it's called Life is, wasn't it called Life is Beautiful? It was like literally pretending to be Charlie Chaplin in a concentration camp.
Yeah. So we're not there yet. Right? Yeah. I mean, the major change in my daughter's life is that I allowed her to get into Roblox, and that's been crazy.
Was that just an issue of like too much screen time?
It's I'm not even particularly hung up on screens. I'm like, no. I mean, I was raised by a television and I turned out fine. But it's like the sort of immersiveness of video gaming like has always, I'm like, I don't really know about that. But it became this like social outlet for her. You know, she would get on FaceTime and like FaceTime and play. And it seemed both cruel not to let her. I mean, she's an only child, like, you know, she wasn't having her usual slate of like play dates. And also I'm like, I need you to be doing something so that I can do stuff. So yeah, it kind of turned into this whole thing where now she lives in Roblox. And it is what it is, I guess. I don't know.
How much has this affected your productivity or your output? Are you spending the same amount of time working that you were previously?
Nope.
It's plummeted.
It's been kind of hard. And yeah, I've kind of adjusted by just staying up later and later, which honestly was a little easier before school started. But now, you know, she's got to get up for, you know, I mean, she has to be at school on the computer at 8:45. But today was like the first day of in person. But she goes feral pretty quickly. Like she'll sleep if we don't make her do anything, she'll fall asleep at 10 and she'll wake up at 8:30 or 9. But I have gotten myself into, like, I usually go to sleep between 2 and 5, and wake up between 9 and 10. But if she has to do school, then, you know, then I'm up earlier. So that's been.
You were pretty nocturnal to begin with?
Yeah.
That's when you do your best work?
It is. And if I can sort of get past the hump of being like, you know, tired when I put her to bed, then like I can have a really good productive night. I have the best technique I have found is to do like, you know, get her to bed, and do like a half-hour workout, and then like let that energy take me into whatever it is I have to actually go to sleep. And my husband's the opposite. Like he is down for the count by 9, and it's rare that he's able to sleep past 6 o'clock. So yeah, we're kind of ships in the night. Has
that basically been the case for most of your professional life?
Not until, well, yeah, I guess so actually, because he was a late sleeper until 2011. We went to my best friend's wedding in Australia, and the jet lag broke him.
Just ruined him for life. I guess I mean specifically for your own stuff, you know, because there is that sense of like early on, you know, I know you had some, like you were working at some record distro. Yeah. And obviously, like anyone who is pursuing, you know, some sort of creative field and is not independently wealthy, you have to really find those hours after work to do it.
Exactly. I mean, I've always been like a night owl tending person anyway. But yeah, for sure, when I had a day job, I would just, I would do my real work at night. I would say that I never put in a great performance at my day jobs.
You didn't care as much?
It wasn't what my ambitions didn't lie in my day jobs. Like I enjoyed my jobs. I used to work at a record distributor called Caroline, and I enjoyed that job. It's where I met my husband, but that wasn't like what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And then previous to that in Chicago, I worked for a distro outfit called Carrot Top, and I waitressed and did, those are all things that like I enjoyed well enough, but it wasn't like what I wanted the path of my life to take.
Was there ever a point though when it felt that you wouldn't really be able to earnestly pursue being an artist for life?
Oh, for sure. I had that feeling a lot more in Chicago because I felt like I was getting a certain amount of work, but it just felt like I was just kind of spinning my wheels. I didn't really feel like I was ever gonna like move out of this rut. And then moving here things started to happen like relatively quickly. I mean, I at least knew that if I was going to be spinning my wheels, it would be in a different rut. But I started getting more work right away. I started like seeing more avenues and possibilities to work. I met people that were doing interesting things that I kind of wanted to be a part of. And so I moved here in January of 2014, and I quit my last day job in 2016. No, my God, what am I saying? I moved here in 2004.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, wow, that happened so fast.
No, my God.
It's really just the length of the Trump administration.
Yeah. Time really pancakes in it.
Time is horrible. I noticed that at this point in my life that like you can lose a decade like that.
Seriously can. I don't like it at all. No, I moved here in January 2004. I quit my day job in 2006 and have not had a day job since.
This is a while ago when I was having a conversation with somebody and I kept calling Trump Bush.
Right.
And I don't know, like, I just think there's this thing that happens to your brain. It's like a mad fold-in at a certain time. Like, it just completely compresses.
Oh, absolutely. I had this very unpleasant thing happen to me where I was on Facebook and somebody posted something about the 45th anniversary of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I'm like, but that's impossible because I remember the 15th anniversary of the Rocky Horror Picture Show because I was 13 and I went for the first time and I was like, oh no. So yeah, it's time. Just keeps rolling.
You started the weekly in Chicago, right?
Yes.
And that must have felt like you attained some level of success, right? I mean, you were being published in different alt weeklies.
Yeah, that felt good. That was the Lulu 8 Ball was still the thing that was most specifically mine. I felt like I really sort of honed the way I write jokes and like my humor sensibility through that. And yeah, I loved doing that strip. I will say that I made very, 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 very little money. Like I never could have lived off Lulu. But also I really had no clue how to like make it into like a web comic or like, work the online angle to it at all.
What was the disconnect? Just the promotion or?
Promotion. I didn't have my own like website for it at that point. Like, I had like a very bare bones portfolio site, but it just didn't click that I was like, I still was like, well, but it's in print. Print is important. Meanwhile, Perry Bible Fellowship is amassing this huge following online, and all these other like amazing web comics are really getting popular, and I just somehow was like, I don't know how to do that, so I guess I'm never gonna. So yeah, that was a tactical mistake on my part.
Why did you end up stopping the weekly? Because
it had dwindled to the point where it was really only still in the Baltimore City paper, and it was, they were paying me $10 a week, and a lot of other things were like, at that point, like besides the New Yorker, I was trying to sell a TV show, and I was writing the Celebrity Dirt segment of the Jenny McCarthy radio show. So I was just at a point where I'm like, something's got to give. And I felt like every week I was just giving Lulu 8-Ball like the shortest possible shrift. And I'm like, I don't want to do a shitty ghost version of Lulu. And I'm like, and the Baltimore City paper had been bought by the Sun paper and was very clearly on its last legs anyway. So I'm like, I'm just gonna, hit pause on this for the foreseeable future. And yeah, and then like a few months later, the City paper did go out of business. So
I found that with every personal project in my career that I've abandoned, that I've just hit pause on all of them.
Yeah.
The idea that at some point in my life I was going to come back to them.
Totally.
Do you think that there's any remote chance that you will revisit that?
I've thought about that actually. I've thought about like, I'm like, maybe I should do like a Substack newsletter or something like that. Like I have thought about it. I haven't actually done it yet, but it's definitely like, someday I'll get the band back together.
There's something about the regularity that you must miss of like knowing what you're doing week in, week out.
Yeah. And I mean, that's somewhat fulfilled by like the batch schedule at the New Yorker and everything. I mean, that sort of like gives a certain rhythm to my week. But yeah. And I mean, I just miss the, it felt like I could basically just sit there in Lulu 8-Ball writing land and just kind of play around in my own shit for a while, which was fun. But yeah, I miss it. But I honestly wouldn't say like, well, I'm never going to do it again. But I also use so much of what I used to write that strip to write like a lot of the other things I do. So
do you feel your stuff becoming more personal as you move on? Obviously there's New Yorker gag strips, but like whenever I see something of yours that's really, shared among my friends, it does seem to really be that the personal stuff, the COVID one, the recent COVID one is a good example. The Jawbreaker one is a good example that like, there's something that you're tapping into when you write something that is deeply personal.
Yeah, I think that has become sort of an important part of what I do. I feel like it's my instinct to couch every feeling I have in a thick batting of jokes. But I have noticed, and I don't know if it's just a function of getting older or things shifting in the way that I think, but sometimes I just feel like I just want to tell the truth. Just tell it as something as truthfully as I can. And sometimes jokes help you tell the truth, and sometimes it's just you avoiding the truth. So yeah, there are definitely times where I'm like, this is something that's just going to have to be a more serious piece. I sometimes go back and forth when I'm going to do something serious, if this needs to be like an essay or if this needs to be a comic. I don't know if I have like necessarily a good method for discerning which should be which. But yeah, I am glad that I've had the opportunity to do both.
It's hard to make jokes. I know it's such a cliche thing to say, but like just in the current moment, there's a lot of value in being kind of really raw and true. If you can be honest and transparent about your struggles, then that's something that people are going to tap into right now.
Well, I think if there's one sort of like connective thread that runs through everything I do, it's that like when I feel my work is at its best, it's when I've been able to keep sight of my sort of absurd quixotic love for our idiot, finite, tiny, minuscule, precious lives. Years ago, a friend of mine like paid me probably one of the best compliments I've ever got about my work, which was that it was kind, and I try to keep that as kind of as sort of a touchstone, like for everything that I do professionally. In my own personal life, I'm a monster.
What does that mean? What does it mean for your work to be kind?
It means that I try to keep a a spirit of generosity towards the human experience, towards the fact that we're all in this ridiculous boat together. I mean, like, obviously there's, a galaxy of difference in our circumstances, but we're all, going to die. And we're all sort of just, here lost and alone for like a short amount of time. And we kind of have to look out for each other.
This is one of very sort of few moments in the history of my life that I can think of where there is one thing. I mean, maybe 9/11 was like that to some degree, but even that like affected people to varying degrees. I was in like California at the time, and I was asleep when it all happened, so I don't have a great story. But this is one moment, like you said, we're all in the same boat. Things affect us differently, but this is one moment where, like, obviously it's still a spectrum, but like where we're all kind of to some degree going through the same thing at the same time.
No, absolutely. And it is an ongoing worldwide problem. I mean, 9/11 was unifying to an extent, but it was a singular event. And its reverberations obviously, were felt for a long time, but it wasn't like this sort of like ongoing seismic shift in how we did being humans. And that I think is something that really has it messed with the psychology of the whole world. It's like, how do we do being human right now? And that sadness, that grief of that is something that like that I feel, and kind of have to work with.
As somebody who makes an effort to be, I mean, is it safe to say that you make an effort to be human and humane, or is that something that just kind of comes naturally?
No, I try. I'm naturally a garbage person.
As that pertains to your work, do you is there sort of a pervasive impact that COVID and everything else that's happening right now is having on your work across the board?
I think that it has forced me to it's kind of forced me to like really think more deeply about things than I might have previously. It's made instability a lot more of a present, worry. I feel like it made certain worries that could have been abstract, less abstract, and it's taken other worries. Like, I don't know, I wrote an article for Long Reads about aging that I sold before the pandemic, and then it ran after the pandemic, and I was like, who gives a shit about my neck now? But I am happy to report that I have, throughout the pandemic, I have managed to keep worrying about my neck. So there's that. But yeah, I think it's the not knowing. I think that's hardest on maybe all of us, just not knowing what's going to happen, not knowing like how to fight, sometimes not even knowing like, how scared we should be. It's the confusion and the unendingness of it, I think, really has a dampening effect on all of your on everything, really.
Obviously there is value in doing a gag strip. There's value in doing something that can, that will make people laugh. But was there a point early on where just doing kind of a quick joke that felt perhaps more trivial than it had before?
Not necessarily, because I think it's really, really, really important to have moments of even just the stupidest levity. I think my ambition towards like markers of success might look a little more silly in this light, but I don't think that a desire to help people laugh feels trivial.
Something you must be pushing against, when you do sort of the more personal stuff, is perhaps worrying about maybe being a little bit too navel-gazy or being a little too sentimental. I mean, are you somebody who, like, do you tend to kind of bristle at being a little too open or a little too earnest?
I never bristle at being too open. I worry sometimes. It's like, oh, stop whining. Like, but yeah, I don't necessarily ever feel like, oh, I've revealed too much about myself, because, like, you know, like most writers or people who deal with humor at all, it's like, here's my heart.
Cartoonists especially, I've noticed that there's something
Yeah.
about humor cartoonists that really I have no problem.
Yeah, no, we'll take a shit in public. It doesn't matter. But yeah, I try not to stray into self-pity. I don't know if I'm always successful, but I try.
Are you working on longer stuff at the moment?
I am. I'm working on I'm working on a young adult pitch that I've been working on for forever, with a very, very, very kind.
Going to ask, because I was listening to like a couple of 2018 interviews that you did, and you had a very specific idea at the time.
That specific idea has taken many forms since then. So, but we're getting there.
It was an epistolary book. I think maybe a conversation between you and a younger version of you.
Yeah, it's not even close to that anymore.
Okay, that sounded like a good idea. I was into it at the time.
Yeah, no, it's now sort of like a straight ahead graphic novel set in the 90s. So yeah, I mean, I'm working on that. The main other proposal that I need to put together is like a kind of a gift box version of a course in gag cartooning that I teach. And I am also working on a Kickstarter to start a humor writing residency for ladies. So just trying to get as many balls in the air as possible.
I mean, it sounds like you find teaching, is it as fulfilling as doing creative work?
Oh, I do like teaching. I don't teach regularly. I taught an online course in the beginning of the pandemic that I actually really loved. Yeah, I teach workshops, or I taught workshops like in various venues before all of this went down. And yeah, what I like about teaching is it teaches me, it like helps me love something all over again, like describing what you love about something and how to do it. Sort of helps me remember why I like it, or remember how I like it, or remember how I do what I do. So, and it's really fun to watch people like do these exercises or practices and really like get into it and watch it change what they do. Like, yeah, no, I love teaching.
Do you feel that over the years you've become more disconnected with whatever it was that you fell in love with in the first place?
Sure. I feel like with drawing especially, drawing has always been at least a little painful because I have never, ever really been happy with how I draw. And I've like, what I want to be able to do with it and what I can do with it is so far apart that it is sometimes like physically painful to do. So there are times when I feel like I want to go into couples counseling with my work and figure out a better relationship to it. You know, that sense of like joy or flow or whatever, like I can hit that sometimes when I'm writing, which is great. And then I remember that the reason I went to art school in the first place is that I didn't want to ever hate writing. So here we are.
You felt that just the process of like seeing how the sausage was made or that pursuing it professionally was going to make you hate it?
I think so. I mean, granted, you can't really, the things people think when they're 18 are sometimes kind of ridiculous.
I mean, it sounds like you were
but I was right.
on in that one.
So I thought that it wasn't even like a how the sausage is made kind of a thing. I just didn't want to be in a position where it felt like a grind. But and because I put a lot less pressure on myself about that, in terms of writing, I feel like that grew in a healthier way than drawing did. And then performing is just this like weird offshoot where I have no illusions about ever being like a professional stand-up or anything, but I love to be on a stage and tell jokes. It's just very fun. And it feeds what I do by giving it this kind of like, you know, friction and spark. So yeah, like all the things that I do kind of feed everything else and come with their own set of you know, fears and inadequacies.
There are careers to pursue in purely writing. I am a writer, and you've done a lot of, you know, just sort of straight prose writing. What is it that's kept you coming back to drawing if it's such a painful process?
It's my job.
Is it just that like that's the thing that you got known for, so that's what you keep doing?
That has a lot to do with it. And you know, it is painful, but the only thing that is more painful than drawing is not drawing. So yeah. Here we are.
Are you able to find any kind of joy in it at this point?
I am. I mean, you know, yes, not uniformly and not all the time, but you know, it's again, I wish Art and I could go sit on a couch together sometime.
I wonder with my own career and my own life, how much feelings of inadequacy, or even like, you know, perhaps in some cases like imposter syndrome, is actually something that drives you to keep pushing yourself and to keep getting better.
I think it can. Well, I don't think anybody who looks at like what they do and thinks without any hint of doubt that they're awesome and what they've done is awesome, I think that's a bad position to be in, because chances are it's not. I think believing your own hype is a bad situation to be in. I think you can tip over so far that like it gets crippling and you feel worse than you have to. But I think you should always be like at least a little bit dissatisfied with what you've done.
Are you able to look at what you've done and just, you know, be proud and understand why you've, you know, broken through and why people appreciate it?
When I have enough distance from something, sometimes I'm like, oh, this is great.
This isn't the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. And some stuff that I've done where there's an essay I wrote for McSweeney's that I'm really proud of. And I sort of had immediate distance from it because it didn't even really feel like it came from me. Like I wrote that in 20 minutes while my husband was out on a walk, and it was just, and like, you know, they came home and he opened the door. I'm like, don't talk. And it felt so like it just came from this ether that like I didn't even feel like I had any ownership over it. And that's one of the things that I'm proudest of that I've written. It was yes, I was in charge of the deck chairs on the Titanic, and they absolutely did need rearranging. Was
it the subject matter, or was it just kind of the circumstance of, you know, kind of feeling like you were channeling something?
Yeah, I think it was almost like a pep talk to myself in a weird way. Like, you know, everything might feel, you know, futile, but everything has always been futile, and you do the best you can for the sacredness of the work. And that is its reward. Is
that a feeling that you're going to be chasing now that you've experienced it?
Totally. Yeah, it was amazing.
Is there something that you can kind of like isolate from that experience that, you know, you feel like can inform you toward perhaps experiencing that again?
Well, the idea for that sort of popped into my head while I was just doing chores. You know, and then I kind of sat down the next day. I think sort of realizing that my subconscious will do a lot of the work when I give it something else to do, is a lesson that like I learn over and over. That like giving my hands something to do, like, you know, wash the dishes, clean the kitchen, et cetera, a lot of times, you know, things will bubble up out of my brain just because it's my brain isn't occupied on my phone. So yeah, I think I've probably ceded a lot more brain space to my phone than is good for me.
It's a double-edged sword of having a creative career and being a freelancer is like, you know, obviously you can make your hours, but in a certain sense, you're kind of always working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially, you know, if you're writing or doing work about like current events, you kind of can't just be like, well, I'm just going to take a break from all of this for a while. So you kind of have to know what's going on, both in terms of like politics and, you know, just general social vibe.